Business Matters, where we discuss all things small business. And of course, we talk about the entrepreneurs that make these companies go and grow. As always, thank you to Community News for this platform. We always have interesting guests, and today we have somebody who has dealt at the highest levels of business and is now taking that knowledge to smaller businesses. And please welcome Jackie Matos from Jackie Matos and Associates. Jackie, how are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me here, Carlos.
It's my pleasure. I have to say, I have to vouch for Jackie. I have seen her in action, and she is a consummate professional. And sometimes she cracks the whip, I got to admit it, but she really helps us anyway execute much better and shows us how to be better leaders. Before we talk about what you do, tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, where you went to school, if you went to school, I don't know. Tell us a little bit about that.
Awesome. Thank you. Originally from New York and Connecticut, so
Okay.
I guess I'm a Northeasterner.
Okay.
Went to NYU and Columbia, and
Small little not prestigious schools.
and then moved to Florida probably 15 years ago, South Florida. I'm in Coral Gables, and glad to transition to the warm weather.
Okay. So what motivated that move? Was it just the weather or something else?
Probably a change in life, and getting divorced and starting a wonderful new chapter in my life, and started on Miami Beach and ended up in Coral Gables, and here I am,
Okay.
14 years later.
So you've brought up this topic before about the servant leader. And I have to use a biblical New Testament reference. I mean, in my eyes anyway, Jesus Christ was the ultimate servant leader. So many followers, definitely executed. So what is, in your terms, a servant leader?
Yeah, it's a great question. And there's so many books written on it, and so many people talk about it. And I think the simple way of describing a servant leader is someone who's incredibly talented at their trade, but incredibly humble at heart. Someone who would almost sacrifice their ego for the success of the team, someone who thinks of others more than they think of themselves, and someone who is dedicated to showing people their greatness. I think that's a humble leader.
Are there a lot of them around? Or, I mean, when you read about some of these big leaders, CEO types, on the outside, maybe it doesn't seem that way, but are they out there?
Yes, but very few.
Okay.
I think that we're moving towards that when you hear about this mindfulness at work now, or becoming a work engine. Organizations are trying to be work engines of well-being. Why? Because I think the people are falling apart under poor leadership. So much so, as you know, that the Surgeon General had to create a framework for organizations, knowing that 1 in 5 people are suffering with mental illness due to the pressure at work. And it's due to poor leadership. It all goes back to it. And I don't want to ramble, but it's a $550 billion problem for the US globally, annually, poor leadership. So it just encompasses so many things.
So it's costing companies actually $500 billion, basically.
Yes. And how it shows up is in poor performance, lack of engagement, lack of retention. You can't work well under a poor leader. It's hard. You shut down.
Yeah.
You stop working. The Great Resignation is a sign of that, right? People would go and show up.
Yeah.
Or quiet quitting.
Quiet quitting. Yeah. Quiet quitting, where people are there, but they're not really there. They're just barely just doing their job.
Yeah. They're checking in, but they're getting their paycheck and they're checked out.
So you have been in your craft. You have been everywhere from the boardroom to the lunchroom. What are some of the things that you've observed, problems that you've had to correct in some of these companies that you've worked for? And some of them are very much household names. Others are local household names, but all of them of some renown. What are some of the things you've seen?
Probably poor execution, poor leadership. So companies will engage with JMA to fix a problem, a big one, or to bolt onto an initiative and make it better with execution. So what I see is poor leadership, poor execution, and it shows up in poor performance and lack of results.
Can you, I mean, without naming names, give us some examples of some of the issues you've had to deal with? I don't know if they go on the, up on the crazy scale that people would never imagine to more mundane problems in both leadership and execution.
So I think your question was, what are some of the problems, right?
Right.
It's a good question. And how does it show up? I think that the big problem shows up in alignment. When someone tries to align a big mission, a big initiative, and you find that your people are in silos, they can't align with the initiative. That's when the leader starts to fall off the grid and upper leadership starts to realize we have a problem, Houston. No one's following that leader and he's carrying our most important initiatives. Let's say they're opening up a new market globally. It takes a lot of teamwork to do something big. The poor leader will show up quickly when he doesn't have the bandwidth to align the people, the strategy, the culture with that initiative. It'll show up quickly.
What do you mean by people are in silos?
They're not working together.
Okay.
So they've created their own teams within teams. If the leader's not leading well, people will scatter. Okay. And then there's gossip.
Okay.
There's bullying.
Wow.
There's poor communication, and that's where toxic environments can take over. I've been hired for toxicity for global companies, prestigious companies where you wouldn't think that that would exist. And the toxicity was so steep that, I come in with a team of like industrial psychologists and stuff. So self-mastery is very important in leadership because you really have to know who you are, be humble, have a lot of courage, and care about your people. If you care about your people, I think chances are likely that they're going to want to align with you.
When you speak of toxicity, were you referring to some of the things you said, gossip, bullying, those kinds of things?
Yes.
Okay.
And that leads to poor health. And if you're in that environment all day, it's really hard to go home and be a good mom, good dad, good person. You're really just trying to deal with that stress that you've been under for many, many hours. And then you've got to wake up and do it again.
That's interesting because it goes way beyond the workplace. It's really far reaching and affects your personal life.
Yeah. Yeah. My new tagline this year, it always used to be driving execution, right? I worked with Franklin Covey and learned all about discipline and execution and launched my company in 2009. But I know now that there is no execution without leadership. It's so hard to do because even if you're a solopreneur, sometimes it'll break in your own hands.
What does that mean?
It means that you don't surround yourself with mentors and people that speak into your life, people that have been there before you, that you're not ready to launch a business. And good segue that I do want to pay attention to the small business now. After being with hundreds of CEOs and thousands of teams, I'm catering my offering to the small business so that they can learn about having a strategy, how to execute, how to communicate. A lot of small businesses don't have the business liquidity to succeed in what it takes. And we all, the last few years, everyone became an entrepreneur and a business owner. So I'd love to focus on building them up.
Yeah, we're definitely aligned in that respect because my career track is very similar. I used to deal with very large companies, Fortune 500 companies, the US government. And as I tell the story, I was on a plane one day at 30,000 feet, and I had an epiphany that if large companies need marketing help, so do small companies even more. So and also what I like to say is that the small business owner wear so many hats,
Right.
so many hats. How can you help them, Jackie?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you get that spirit of overwhelm, right?
Yep.
I know I have as well.
Sure.
Because you are everything, and then you hire people, and then the fun starts. But how to help a small business owner, I think, is to build a blueprint, a very specific one in which I think I do very well in less than 2 hours. And you got to frame your strategy. Your strategy has to be framed around the most critical initiatives that you want to achieve. And then you need to put together a way to execute that. And I've mastered that in one blueprint. And I think that if someone walks away with knowing what they're doing, how to do it, and then there's the accountability piece. I think solopreneurs and small business owners need that accountability piece. Someone who mentors them, who coaches them, who rides alongside them to make sure that they're achieving monumental goals. And also sometimes you need to know that there's someone who says, you can do this. You've got this, when you sometimes feel like giving up.
You know, I have a friend who hired a business coach, and he told me it paid off 20-fold, that it really just gave him a different perspective. I don't know the details of what this person did exactly, but he said it was one of the best things he's ever done. Tell us about that framework, because you actually have a trademarked framework, correct? What is it called? And without giving away the store, how does it work?
Yeah. Well, there are two different types of frameworks, right? One is for big organizations or bigger. And it sort of encompassed my best work. And it came after COVID, and it's called the CLEAR framework. And I do have a press release on that. And what it does is it takes these modules. And if you look at the acronym CLEAR, we hone in on culture. We know that there's no way you're going to do great things without having the right culture.
Talk to me about culture, because I think it's a difficult concept to understand within a business. What are some positive cultures, or what should a positive culture look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Culture, I define it simply as how you do business and how you treat people.
Okay.
I see culture when I walk into an organization just in body language. Culture, rephrase that question. I just lost my train of thought.
No problem. It's just, what is culture within a company? Mm-hmm. I mean, I think we're all familiar with what culture is in general.
And a good culture.
And what's a good culture?
Yes, thank you so much. I think one of high trust.
Okay.
I love high trust cultures, because people are free to say what they feel without anyone pointing fingers and saying, well, that's your fault. They have great feedback systems and loops. They have great communication. Love cultures of high innovation. People are coming up with ideas because they're game on. They're coming to work with that switch on. So you get great ideas. Innovation, great leadership is a culture. Meaning, I can go see Carlos right now and he'll solve this issue, but I'm going to come to him with solutions, because you've already have a great culture of how you even handle big problems, and it's also, I think, a culture of high achievement.
Okay.
And high performance, high accountability. And then when I engage with people, right, this is so much fun. We do current culture. I get together with teams. By the way, I think that's my secret sauce. I love working with individuals, but I've learned through so much studying that we learn through peer groups. So most of everything that I do these days that bring back that 300% return is I take your entire team. I take all your leaders through this process. Or that's a vertical engagement. I'll take your leaders, I'll take your CEOs, I'll take your VPs. Or I go vertical right down to a team. Marketing's in trouble and they drop us in there. So we start with culture, back to the model. And then we hit leadership for the L. Okay. We define leadership. We go after gaps. We'll take assessments. We'll know who you are. We know what your strengths are. And we take that leadership to the next level. And then we hit on execution, which is measuring what matters most. Then we hit accountability and results. That's the acronym. Those are modules. Those we take you through with your peers. So there's that accountability. Everyone's on the same page. It's hard to change culture with one person.
Sure.
I take your entire organization through a cultural shift. So I haven't seen anything as powerful out there as pulling in peer groups internally. Vistage is doing it, YPO is doing it, but it's external. So you're meeting with a bunch of CEOs, and I bring in that model in your organization. I bring the change in there, and the people are accountable. There's homework, there's assignments, there's righting wrongs. I think the craziest thing I did was I implemented in a global company, billions, a no gossip policy with a team that was literally eating each other up. They couldn't stand one another, everyone on the team.
That just sounds so crazy to me.
It was crazy. I curled up in a ball with this engagement, and I thought I'd fall. But you know what? In 90 days, the change was unbelievable.
How did you make it happen?
Not even me. It was them. It was a great facilitator, and I think you've met her, Marilyn. She's an industrial psychologist. When she uncurled me for this assignment. So you never know what you're getting into with the client until you're in.
Very true.
And, you know, you could scope the project out, but when you're in, you're like, wow, this is what they really hired me for. We were just open and honest, and the conversations were facilitated by me and Marilyn. They had homework. We addressed the gaps. We addressed the gossip, the toxicity, they themselves identified their culture and identified what they wanted it to be. And they worked towards that. Everyone had a change of heart, like maybe this could work. Maybe we can get along. Maybe we don't have to get divorced.
Talking about the clear framework. Does that translate to, for example, me? I have 2 employees. That's it. It's 3 of us and a part-timer. So it's 3.5 employees. Does the clear framework apply to a business like mine, or is there something else that you would do? Yeah.
Through the 15 years that I've been doing this, I built a lot of models, business models, leadership fast tracks that I just bring in and can install in a company. And the execution fast track is what I'm focused on most for small organizations. And what that will be is the blueprint that highlights your strategy, that highlights how you're going to execute, and then I bolt onto it with you. Okay. I'm your accountability piece. I make you stretch higher, and I help you launch this.
So, Jackie, just be honest. You crack the whip, right? Is that what you do?
No. You've seen me. You've seen me do it because they've been very complicated teams where there's no alignment, and I myself feel disheartened. Like we shouldn't be acting like this. Yeah. Okay, we should be bigger people. And then you see me at the helm, and then I get frustrated. I usually am teaching leaders how to do. I'm often one step removed from being thrown into the team myself. Right. So the inmates run the asylum type of thing. Okay. I think if you work with me one-on-one, it's more about me seeing your greatness and knowing that this opportunity is aligned for you. And I almost go shoulder to shoulder with you to achieve it. And I've done that very well with executives, also moving positions. They make $400K and they're going to move from NBC to Amazon. But, I'm in my 50s. I'm not sure. I love working with people that want to achieve something that they themselves don't think they can. And believe me, when they get that job, I got that job. Do you know? I literally feel, I research, I get into the interviewing process, I scope out the CEO with them. I think it's what I'm going to get scriptural. 2, put 10,000 a flight. Mm-hmm. Right? And when it's 2 and you got your eye on a vision and a mission, and you got a champion saying, yes, we can, and I know we can, then you launch things that you never thought you could.
How do you identify when the right person is in the right seat and maybe the wrong person is in a seat that they shouldn't be there? Have you ever run into that? And yes. And what happens?
Everything falls apart.
Okay.
Very quickly. And then you have upper leadership panicked because they know that this leader's not effective. So it's like, hi, can you come in and train someone to be a great leader? Maybe assess him because we probably may have to get rid of this guy, but he's at a very high level. So organizations pay a big price. And now that's why you see a lot of vetting. They'll even take your family out to dinner. Right. They will.
Has it gotten
They will
that to-
examine you. They'll take all these assessments. They'll do panel interviews, praying that this is the right person. Panel interviews are very big.
Yeah.
You know, you bring in the whole team to say,
Right.
you're going to have to agree on this person, otherwise we're not moving forward.
Yeah.
And when you hire the right person, it's almost like a beautiful symphony.
Yeah.
You know, you see people flowing and ideas going. You see big wins with good leaders. They can make monumental wins. They make commitments and they achieve them. And then your people watch and they go, wow, that's me.
Yeah.
That's a leader I can follow.
As
Versus a micromanager.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, but I had to add that.
Yeah, because I used to have a very large staff in a former life, and hiring is so challenging. And I imagine it is more challenging now. I've been very fortunate. It's not easy. I've gone through people and had to dismiss them. Any tricks for tips and tricks for hiring people? You mentioned already having a panel, going out with their family. Anything else that you should be looking for when you're hiring somebody?
Character.
Okay.
Character, integrity, and
Okay.
courage. And those are hard things to detect. But if you spend time with someone and if you listen to them clearly, you can tell, whether someone stands for those things. If they're talking too much about themselves and their accomplishments in a way that seems egotistical, I think you can almost smell humility and arrogance. When arrogance comes in the room, it smells.
Yeah.
People turn their nose up. And when a good leader comes in the room, they inspire people. They bring in this energy, this is a term that was overused but important. They bring in that psychological safety.
Okay.
And that's big, meaning I'm safe under this leader, financially, emotionally, professionally. I feel safe.
Yeah. I like to say that I hire for attitude. To me, attitude is
Yes.
everything. And I guess that's wrapped into what you just said, because really you can train somebody in just about anything, really. That's my attitude anyway. But attitude over anything,
Yes.
even if they're full of knowledge, if they don't have the right attitude. And also, once they get into the job, people that take initiative makes all the difference in the world. And I got to give a shout out to my digital marketing coordinator, Fides Jimenez. She does a great job. And those are the type of people really I want to find. Somebody told me, and I don't necessarily agree with this, long ago, they said, if you have one employee, you have one problem. So what do you think about that statement?
It's very true.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. I mean, you're responsible for the people.
Yep.
Leadership is a hard job. You are always being watched. You are always an example. It's almost like you live in a glass bowl.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and if you're asking someone to do something, you better do it yourself. You better be the example of that. So I think leadership is hard, and you're constantly interfacing with people. Some people are leaders, but they're not great with people. So they shouldn't be interfacing so much. Maybe you
Okay.
should have them in operations
Okay.
or something else. But I think that your leader who interfaces with people should be amazing at bringing out talent.
Because you mentioned about the leaders, it's kind of like it should be do as I do, right?
Yes.
Not just as I say. How does a leader get buy-in? Because you see, some organizations just humming, the CEO or the head person is able to sell that vision, that mission, and others fall flat. How do these great leaders sell their vision in?
That's a great question. Part of my process builds that in, because I know how important that is. You can't set vision and mission and just tell people where they're going and what you're doing. It doesn't resonate. So when the CEO sits in front of everyone in a town hall or on a Zoom and says, we're going to take this mountain and this is how we're going to do it, if it doesn't translate into their everyday life, not everyone buys in. So part of that blueprint for me, when we get into execution with teams, is always about going back to your team and getting buy-in. It's part of the process to install an execution methodology. You don't go in alone. Your team literally built into the strategy. Once your team built into the strategy, there's usually buy-in, and then I bolt on the accountability piece, which means every week we are going to talk about the milestones that move the needle, and everyone accounts to how they're going to contribute. It creates this fun game. And believe it or not, it's the furthest thing from micromanagement. It's where you start learning from other people on these calls. It's best practices come into play. It's like, whoa, that's what Carlos does to move the needle every week. I'm on it, or I'm going to go see Carlos. So it starts this whole synergy of achievement. And then I always keep a scoreboard because, everyone likes to keep score. And we're just grown-up kids. Why can't we make work fun around achievements? And by the way, that scoreboard is only revenue moving activities.
Interesting.
That's the 20%. I've just carved it out of your busy work week. So my blueprint takes your busyness and says, hold on, busyness. We got to hit the financial needle.
So how does the accountant participate in that? The accountant is not selling. The clerk is not selling. How are they participating in this whole business about moving the needle?
Because everyone plays a role.
Okay.
I'll use a silly example of a grocery store. That meat department that could say, I have nothing to do with taking Publix grocery store to 50 billion this year. You have everything to do with them. We're going to tell you what you have to do in the meat department to keep those sales up and everyone coming back to that meat department. They're like, oh, you're right. I guess I do carry 500 million of the billion, and how can I move that needle? And you reward that person. So everyone ties into it. Yes, Baptist, a great example, Baptist Hospital. They know that director of first impression, guess where that person sits? Director of first impression. Take a guess at Baptist.
Well, ideally, in a perfect world, they'd sit right in the front desk there.
Yeah, they hit him even before that. He's in the parking lot.
Wow.
So I think excellence is about really, really knowing that everyone has a piece of that, especially that person greeting you in the parking lot, because that's your first impression.
So now that you mentioned greeting in the parking lot, what happened to Walmart greeters? No, I'm just kidding.
It's granular. Strategy drops to your front line.
Right. Being a marketer, I'm always customer-centric. Mm-hmm. What is the benefit at the end of the day after all this happens? Let's say the clear framework works to a T at an organization. How does that trickle down to the customer now?
Wow. I think that is a customer, right? To my organization, the customer, that's my second customer, is you have your internal customer and you have your customer. I think if my organization is thriving and we're at peak performance and everyone's rowing in the same direction, that customer experience is going to feel it. That customer is going to feel it. Because most companies even have a customer experience program, a customer loyalty program,
right,
a customer retention program, and you have people focused on that. And they're happy and they're engaged and they themselves believe in their organization. I think that transfers. It's a transfer of enthusiasm, right?
I like that, a transfer of enthusiasm.
I've often defined that as a sale, by the way, when I was getting out of school and working with all my fun companies. Yeah, it's a sale is a transfer of enthusiasm. You manage to get someone as enthused as you about your product.
I like that. I may have to use that, Jackie. I may have to steal that from you. Talking about something that's very relevant, and this is probably the last question because we're running out of time. This whole business about people working from home, companies wanting them to go back.
Yeah.
Have you had to deal with that? What's going on with that? Because it seems I read something about that every day.
Yes, yes. I think most people want to work remotely these days.
Okay.
And I think organizations have struggled because they also invested in lots of real estate to house these people.
Okay.
And I think that one thing that is missing from being totally remote is that collaboration that happens face to face.
Yeah.
So I think a good solution that many companies have done is the hybrid model,
Okay.
letting people have their workspace at home and having them come in to collaborate when necessary. And don't be a baby. I mean, if your company needs you back, show up as well. I mean, so many people are just, I think we've grown accustomed to not having people around us, and everyone wants to be a little too solo.
Yeah. I guess the pandemic didn't help.
Right. Though that's where
that's where it all started.
we got comfortable with our space.
Yep. Jackie, we are out of time.
Okay, great.
Thanks so much for being on the show. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Very insightful. And I think, yes, well, you know what? Let's say it to the camera. How can they get in touch with you? People that want to be better leaders and execute better.
Great. Thank you. You could reach me via text, 305-726-4230, or shoot me an email at jackie@jackiematos.com. Reach out on LinkedIn, and looking forward to connecting with you. Carlos, thanks so much for having me here today.
My pleasure. And thank you for being here today on Small Business Matters. We'll see you very soon.